For the first time in my career, and I've been doing this for quite some time, we have more people registered internationally than we do domestically. It's pretty fascinating. We have 19 countries represented, 6 continents. Brandon was bummed that we didn't get anybody from Antarctica, but there is a second series, so we could check that box. Um, so, shout out to people in Australia and New Zealand, which is very late at night for them for attending. And we'll mix in some insights from other geographic areas as we go through here, given the audience that we have. So, okay, what we're going to cover today, if you wouldn't mind moving to the agenda slide here. Quick intros, approach. We're set the baseline here, give you guys some insight and some information that you'll need as we continue through the presentation deck. We are going to then share with you insights through our research. First time that we've done this in 5 years, and we'll talk about how we collected the information, what it means, and then we'll apply it to building out programs, in particular ABM programs. And we'll show you how this insight can really help improve your positioning and messaging in your campaigns and your ABM programs. And also, talk a couple minutes about Crystal and how we use it internally. So let's keep rolling. I'll jump in here and then Brandon will go. I'm not going to talk about my background as much as I am about chasing behavioral insights around buyers. I started this journey 12 years ago, partnering up when I was with another agency with Forbes and Fortune and research and understanding the role of emotions in purchase decisions. And that curiosity has really led us to where we are today and really understanding how personality impacts the way you consume information, share information, the role you play in the buying group, your preferences and behaviors and motivations, both online and offline, and what that means. So happy to share that with you, but that's where we are. And I spent a lot of time writing about the insights that we discovered through personality-based marketing. Brandon.
Yeah. And just to introduce myself, my name is Brandon Kim. I lead our go-to-market team at Crystal. I've had the pleasure of working at really complex technology companies, from advertising technology, e-commerce, insurance tech, so on and so forth. I would say the coolest company that I've been at is definitely Crystal. We are a company that has an AI that can predict your personality based on your LinkedIn information. So I'm excited to share more, but really excited that Scott and Joan invited me here today, and excited to present to you all.
Okay, so what you're going to see today is a lot of insights that have come out and are produced by our solution, our platform called Carbon Quadrants. Crystal feeds us the information around personality and predicting personality types and informs us around some of those motivations and some of those preferences that you have as a personality. We use Crystal, as I mentioned. I was going to talk a little bit about this. We are a Google Suite company. And with the integrations into Chrome, Crystal is reading my email, giving me insights on people that are writing to me, giving me insights on how I should respond. And it's also, we use it for our webinars, our own personal meetings using Google Meet, where I have the personalities of my team in the window. I can see our customers, and we actually use it to put teams together based on complementary skill sets and personality types. So it's a useful tool in a number of different ways for us.
Yeah, and at Crystal, we're a software as a service platform. We are the leading provider of personality data for business professionals. And so essentially what our AI can do is analyze information on someone's profile and provide the personality type that person is, and then share tips on how to most effectively communicate with them. We're excited to partner with Carbon Quadrants and Scott to offer kind of a full service suite for our end customers. To give you a little bit more background about Crystal, I mentioned that we can analyze personality types. At Crystal, what we use is the personality framework called DISC. DISC is a framework that's been around for hundreds of years. You may be more familiar with Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Big Five. These are all different personality assessments, but where DISC differs is it is most commonly used in workplace settings. In addition to that, it shares how to most effectively communicate with someone that has a different personality style. So we found that to be the best fitting framework for our product. And really, what we use Disc for is to first identify your prospects and buyers to understand what is their personality type and their preferred communication style. After that, we share insights, tips, best use cases for how to adapt your pitch to align with those natural preferences. And at the end of it, we're hoping that you are able to build stronger connections and relationships through becoming more emotionally intelligent and speaking in the native way that the person that you're either selling to or trying to do business with likes to communicate. Really quickly, to share with you more on what the DISC framework looks like is you typically have four major quadrants on the DISC wheel. You have a champion quadrant on your top left. Champions are very fast-paced in nature, very direct, very goal-oriented, and competitive. And usually what we find is business owners, CEOs really lie on that type of the spectrum for most cases. We also have an influencer quadrant on the top right. Influencers really view their workplace like a stage. They love presentations, they love sharing, they love the social aspect of business. And that's where you find most of the folks that are influencers. Sales reps tend to be on the influencer side of the spectrum in terms of personality type. On the bottom right, we have challengers. Challengers are natural born skeptics. These are folks that like to really get into the weeds of things. They love detail. They love more information rather than less. And they're innately curious. And so we find that those that are in the challenger space, they're almost seen as skeptics, where you have to kind of win them over. And finally, we have the steady quadrant on the bottom right. Steady folks view their workplace as almost like a second home. They love to build relationships. They love detail. They love processes. They love to know what to anticipate. Steady folks don't necessarily love change. And so when there is a change that is going to be instituted, you want to make sure that they feel steady, secure, stable in their environment, and they want everything spelled out before something is implemented. The reason why I bring this up is when we think about the DISC framework, what we find is that top sales reps really adapt their approaches to different buyers. So whether you're speaking with any of these four different personality types, it's one, important to be aware of them, but two, also important to adapt how you sell to them in order to speak more towards their natural inclinations. And very quickly, in terms of a pitch, if I'm pitching to a champion, I want to focus my pitch on competitive advantages. I want to know what is it going to do for me? How is it going to help me beat my competitors? Again, champion folks are very, very competitive. If I'm an influencer, I want to build my pitch around excitement. Influencers are dreamers. You want to pitch the end state of what you're offering to show them that this is the vision of what is possible once you decide to do business with us. As I mentioned before, challengers are highly skeptical. There's a high amount of skepticism that they have. And so really focusing your pitch on providing data-driven results, client testimonials, any proof that you can show that you're just not talking, that you have the evidence to back it up. And finally, when you pitch to steady types, you want to focus your pitch around how is this going to make my life more secure, stable? Have we thought of every avenue? Have we spelled everything out? You want to make sure that you can cross every T and dot every I when you sell to a steady type. And again, at Crystal, what we could do is provide you the predicted personality type based on their LinkedIn information, and then share with you how to best effectively communicate with them during all parts of the sales cycle.
Okay, so thank you, Brandon. And for today's purposes, you will see that we are using those terms that are a little bit different from dominant, influencing, conscientious, and steady, because the terms that we're using for that or for the conscientious and for dominant are really about what they do. These are descriptive words. Dominants are champion of other ideas. The conscientious are skeptical of new information, new ideas. So we're using those terms to make it easy for you to understand when, as we go through this, what we're talking or what segment we're talking about. So the question that maybe you had when you registered, or you may have, in the workplace, is why is this needed? Why is personality-based marketing important as it relates to either campaign creation, segment definitions, industry definitions? It's really built around performance. Understanding the softer side of selling is the last bastion for sales improvement and marketing improvement. Understanding people not as titles or roles, but as people making decisions is the last opportunity that you will find for productivity improvement. Personalization, because everything that we have to do is at scale, there is no true personalization. It is a inch deep and a mile wide. And if you take it down to the individual, you just can't hit your goals by going deep into an individual's personality and customizing every message for them. It's not possible. And it's one of the reasons why we found this 65-75% rule, which we'll talk about, is this is the ability to be able to understand personalization, deep personalization at scale. And then finally, relevancy. We have a very noisy, loud world out there. How do we rise above it? How do we connect to our end audiences? And how do we build into our outreach into the way that they have a preference for receiving information? And so we want to be relevant. There's a lot of competition. This is a way to do it. Okay. So Brandon was telling you about what Crystal can enable in terms of understanding people at the personality level. What we're showing is what we found by using AI profiling of personalities in the actual data. So theirs is predictive, ours is actual. We're taking all this information and we're assessing dozens of titles, hundreds of thousands of lines of engagement data, personality profiles based on who you are as a person. And I'll share a lot more of that. How people respond to sales and marketing outreach, the assets, how they consume information. And we've looked across 10 industries. So we're taking the predicted and then matching it with the actual. We're taking online behavior and matching it with offline behavior. And then we're really trying to discover what is real through all of this. And so if you go to the next couple of slides, we're going to share some of those insights. And the way that we've been able to do that, as I mentioned, is we have Crystal that then connects into that database of information that you just saw. And then we also have additional research and understanding. And I work with CEB and then Gartner on understanding the role of different buyers within the buying group and when looking at the attributes of those buyers in the buying group. So connecting all these pieces to understand what individuals do in terms of influencing each other or blocking each other to get a really good understanding of not only are we targeting an individual, we're targeting a buying group. And there are people within that buying group that can influence other people within the buying group. We can get them to advocate for our brand or our solution if we do it right. So the rule of 65-75%. Today's webinar is a perfect example of the rule of 65-75%. As I mentioned, we profiled everyone who registered. And because this is sales and marketing, and it is a how-to webinar, you would expect dominance and influencers, the dominants being the champions, and the influencers to be present. And in fact, 53% of the registrations that we received were people who have a dominant or champion personality. 22% were influencers. So it just happened to hit 65, but this is the case. And what we learned, and as we go through this, Brandon, you can start flipping through the slides that I talked with, over and over again, when we went deep into understanding the people who worked inside of the industry or inside of an organization or held titles and roles or consumed content, we kept seeing this trend of 65-75% of the totals being only true personality types. So when you think about personalization and you've got 4 different personality types, and it can cut into 16 actually micro personalities, it seems overwhelming to figure out how can I scale this. But when you start to realize that there are trends that you don't have to go after four personalities, you can go after two types. And there are two types that are similar to each other based on adjacencies. So we can make it very easy to understand how to be much more personal within an industry, even if we're just starting and going into a new industry, by getting much more accurate and relevant with the way that we're presenting information into the majority of those audiences within those industries. We also saw it, if you'll go to the next slide, we also saw this reflection of the senior management team. So we would go through at the account level, profile a senior management team, and we would find the makeup of the organization was very, very similar, if not exact, to the senior makeup of the senior management team. The 65-75% rule applied again. And because of that, you can define corporate cultures using the personality types of the senior executive team. And I'll talk more about that in a second. All right, want to keep moving? We also found the more education you have in a particular area, or the more of the certifications, the more you become who you are as a person, which is fascinating. And if you're happy in your line of work or your profession or occupation, it's probably because you're closely aligned to who you are as a person. And so it's super interesting. You can now use, like Brandon said, looking at LinkedIn and looking at someone's profession and their certifications, you can get a pretty good feel of who they are as a person from a personality standpoint. Okay. We also looked at preferences for marketing assets. This webinar being an example, I just told you who's showing up. It's sales and marketing. It's a how-to. The other great thing about understanding this and knowing this then is that think of this as a bait that you would put on a fishing line to catch certain fish. In professional services, we find that influencers and studies really like ebooks. Influencers like it because it's light, it's easy to get through, it's quick, and it can be forwarded to someone. Influencers are looking for information to share with others. So it makes sense. Product webinars in life science, we find a lot of studies in that industry, especially people with advanced degrees. Challengers also like it because they like data and research, they like real life information. Case studies in the construction industry, we found that 50% were dominance. It's also because the dominance, in this case, champions, that industry is made up of dominant personalities. These are people who are drivers, project managers. This isn't a business that you are managing projects. So it's a reflection of the industry and the personalities that it attracts, but it's also a reflection of the information that they like to see. Champions like to see case studies that are as specific to their need as possible. They have very narrow field of vision. They're focused on what's in front of them. You have to get that information in front of them. So within industry, within title role, those case studies have to be right aligned, have to be very relevant to catch their attention. Once you do, they're very good at moving things along and become an advocate for you.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense because, as we mentioned, champions are really competitive. They really care about what's in it for them. And so if you could give them assets like a case study to get them smarter about or thinking about things that they haven't thought about to help improve their goals, it makes sense why they would naturally be drawn towards that case study side.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So our target audience, as I mentioned, the opportunity to understand who people are based on the titles and roles and the certifications or the education needed to fill those roles. So in pharmaceuticals, we find data scientists over index as studies. In financial services, and this is actually broader than just financial services, CISO, Chief Information Security Officers, 65% or more are the challengers. They're skeptics, and there's a good reason why you want a skeptic in that role, right? You want something who's constantly pushing and challenging and looking for new ways to be able to bring solutions into the organization to protect it. So That's not something we just found in financial services alone. We've also seen it in other industries. And then we profile the Fortune 500, and 53% of the Fortune 500s are dominant personalities, which, if you think about the descriptions that we've had about the dominance, the champions, it makes sense that they would rise to that level inside of organization, given their competitiveness. Okay. So all of this to say, there is a way to go deep into the way that you're communicating, personalize your assets, personalize the way that you're even using content, which I'll show you, taxonomy even with using AI content generators to become very, very specific and aligned to those audiences that you're chasing. And here's the key slide in the entire presentation. Birds of a feather absolutely flock together. That is why you see the 65, 75% trend. It is because you are attracted to a role or a position or an industry based on who you are. In fact, we profiled a construction firm, large Fortune 500 company. 21 out of the 22 senior managers or senior executives listed on their website had the same personality type. And if you think about that dimension of being your corporate culture, if you are a personality that comes into that culture that is very different, like an influencer in that environment, it's not very often that you're going to stay around for a very long period of time. So these cultures built on these personality types will reject other personality types, right? So these people will come into this environment, realize that it's not necessarily a good match for who they are, and then they move on. So it just keeps reinforcing itself.
Yeah. Not only with colleagues, but also when these managers hire as well, they are
Yes.
looking for someone that it is probably more similar to them rather opposed to the opposite side. So we could see this issue compounding.
Yes. Yeah. So that for sales and for marketing, in particular, marketing makes our lives a lot easier. So let's talk about how we can apply it to positioning and messaging. I'm sorry, Brandon, we the next slide. Okay. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on the top two areas, marketing message at the industry level, and then how you position your value at the corporate level and communicate that. So let's keep rolling. And then the next webinar, if you want to sign up, we'll go down into account and buyer level. Okay. So here's an example of going into an industry. Let's say this is your ICP and you're drilling into then understanding specific accounts within that industry. Great thing about drilling into understanding corporate cultures is that you pick up on tonality, receptivity to message, what assets they'll see as credible. Again, as marketers, we're always fighting for their credibility, where their focus is as an organization, what the corporate culture feel is, and the pace at which they move. And this may be related to the pace that they move at in terms of the decision making. And so here's three very different examples, all have the same profile that would fit an ICP, but are all very, very different in terms of the way that they are looking at receiving the information, the importance of a new solution inside the organization, and what the impact is. You can know all of this before you even have one conversation with the organization, right? You can understand that if you're going to position your value proposition against these three, one is going to be focused on cost savings, another one's going to be focused on the future, innovation, what comes next, right? How they see things in terms of priorities around your solution. Will they be skeptic? Will they be skeptical of the claims that you're making? Instead of perhaps talking about upside, you talk about risk reduction on the downside. It becomes more credible. Then you can understand how to align your assets to fit with the preferences of the organization and the way it consumes its information, right? So we've already talked about the usefulness of case studies with champions, the usefulness of data and research with studies and conscientious, those skeptics. Okay. So industry level, the flocking it together, two dominant personalities. Now at the account level, you can go even further in understanding how you position your value inside of those organizations. You can also, as I mentioned, you can train your AI content generators to speak in the language of those different personality types. And here's a very simple example I like to share is that we trained Chat GPT to talk about the various different personality types. And we asked a very simple question about write a sentence around water conservation. I think it's a really good demonstration about how people speak and receive messages differently based on their personality types. And as you read the champions are action oriented, right? We need to get moving. We need to implement something versus what Brandon was talking about in terms of the influencers, they're high level. They like inspiration. They like big ideas. They like to share big ideas in an organization. They like to get people excited about it. Steadies, as Brandon mentioned earlier on, they seek harmony, right? Let's work on it together. Let's foster the sense of harmony and moving in a better direction. And then challengers are going to analyze everything, right? Let's get to the data. Let's see what the data says, and then we're going to move from there. So I think of all the things that we do, this is the one example where you really start to see the fact that people are different in the way that they speak and in the way they receive information. And think about our own efforts in the way that we write content. We have a tendency to write content that's very flat. It's not in any audience voice. And there can be very different ways of writing the information that we want to communicate to the audience that we're targeting.
Yeah, Scott, it really defines the personalization. I think we've all latched on to personalization means can I use my first name in an email? This goes straight into the deeper roots of personality and really resonates the pitch. So this is an awesome example.
Yeah. Okay. So assets and information, and I'll draw this line a little bit further and I'll use some international references as well. We have looked at the life science industry in South Korea, and I can tell you that it over indexes on conscientious. You have a very large uh, group of rational buyers, almost completely 100% rationally driven in that marketplace. We've also looked at data scientists in Pakistan, over-indexed on being steady. Also see that in developers as well. Champions, as we mentioned, like the case studies because they're deeply relevant to their situation. And more relevant you can get, the better off you're going to be. We mentioned the importance of using something that's very quick and travels, that's light. Influencers love it. They love infographics, animated videos, things that move very, very quickly. They love forwarding webinar invites. So I don't know how many people are attending today or registered actually came via email or a link that was referred to them. But influencers' behavior is the really important side of organizations. It's one of the reasons why you really want to look at your engagement data, because what we found is sharing is actually much better indicator of engagement than downloading something. And you can look at, as a proxy, you can look at the number of emails, number of times, for example, an email was opened on a day by that person. And if you know that they're an influencer and they open that email 10 times within a 2 hour span, they are forwarding that email inside the organization. And so they're very important connective nodes inside of organizations that you want to get to and you want to know, even though they may not be defined as a buyer, they are a good influencer in the organization. And what they do, they have a tendency to be higher up in the organization. And when they're forwarding your information to colleagues, they're giving you credibility, right? They're stamping it to say, take a look at this. So it's really important that you identify and you really use those influencers inside of your organization, in particular, existing accounts. Challengers, don't shoot yourself in the foot with challengers. If you are sending them information, make sure it's sourced. Anytime you have a data point, make sure you're offering the source. Any claims that you're making on an ROI, make sure you can back that up. Anytime that you're talking with challengers, they're asking questions and they're questioning your sources or your information or your upside. Don't BS them. If you have to, say, I'll get back to you. I don't know. The last thing you want to do is kill your credibility with challengers. It's the death. And challenger will continue to push you. And it's one of the things I see with BDRs and SDRs is that they don't stop. when they run into a challenger. They just should stop and say, I'll get back to you on that. Okay. Anything else on this, Brandon, that you want to mention?
No, I think it's really important, Scott, that every personality type has a place in the workplace. And so, as you interact with different personalities, just being aware of what their style is and knowing what they naturally care about is super important.
Yeah.
Um, there may be a certain personality that makes the decision and is the authority on a particular um, deal that you're looking to close with them, but you also cannot neglect the other personalities. You may have your influencers that are your champions, that's spreading the word out. You may have your steadies that are the end users. So knowing that the organization could be mixed with all of these different personalities is important to know.
Yeah. In our next webinar, I'll show you closed deals and I'll show you how people play these roles and the importance of influencers and champions together and where challengers show up in the buying process. So look for that and more information on that in our next webinar. Speaking of which, I think we're at the end. Yes. So we are, this is our contact information. If you're looking for more information, if you go to the Carbon Quadrants page on carbon design, you'll find a lot of resources there. There are ebooks there are articles. And then, Brandon, if there are places you want to point to on your website.
Yeah, for those that are interested, please go to crystalknows.com. We do offer a free account where you can look up 5 different personalities. And so if you're interested, give it a shot at crystalknows.com.
Okay. All right. We're up against the time. Thank you for attending today, staying up late or getting up early, depending on where you are in the world. And we'll look forward to seeing you on December 3rd.